I'm Laura. I am the exhibitions manager at MFA, and I will be your host for tonight's Wil Talk with artists. Our digital discussion tonight is with painter Marisa Evangelista. You may know Marisa as an intern here, but she's also an artist. Since she was young, she knew that she had a strong interest in art. However, it wasn't until she started her first semester at Anne Arundel Community College that she knew she wanted to pursue it as her career. She works with portraiture and figurative paintings in mostly acrylic and sometimes oil paint. She has also recently started to explore plein air landscapes. Additionally, I'd like to introduce the host of our show, Wil Scott. Wil is an art historian with an extensive career as a photographer and the former head of adult programs at the National Gallery of Art. He is uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between artists and the public.
Yes, thank you, Laura, for the introduction. And I see so many familiar faces. I'm glad that you've joined us. Welcome to all of you. And thanks to Laura for subjecting herself to this ordeal. And a couple things I want to say before we go further. First of all, Laura, some of you have gotten to know when you've been corresponding with the office or coming into the gallery or something like that. And so she's replacing the very capable Martha Campbell, who, as you know, left a few months ago. And we already miss her. Not that Laura isn't doing a great job. We just miss Martha because she was Martha. And the other thing I wanted to do is welcome you all tonight that are listening in, because daylight savings time has started and it's warm and a beautiful day, and you've taken time out of your busy schedules to come and get to know Laura. And so I hope you're as interested as I am to do that. Anyway, and the last thing is I see Jim and Sylvia Earle are here, as they so reliably are. And Jim and I just had a wonderful conversation recently, and I hope that you've all had a chance to see it, because it's been posted on the website and is now available for everybody to see. So, Marisa.
Hi.
Hi. How long have you been creating art?
Definitely since I was a kid. I'd say growing up, I would make more cartoony art, but then I started really appreciating representational art probably in high school, mostly in senior year. But I really started taking it seriously once I entered Anne Arundel Community College.
So I'm curious about that, because you are the other end of the, you're a whole different cohort of age groups from Jim. And Jim, you know, had an extensive career. You're a very young person who's realized your interest in the visual arts at an early stage. So I want to explore that just a little bit more than I might otherwise do. So when you say that you started to become interested in high school, which high school were you going? And was it one of the art schools that we have available, or did you just have a good art teacher?
I just had a really amazing art teacher. Her name is Renee Tobin from Archbishop Spalding in Severn. And she just, I feel like the art program at Spalding really blew me away, even before I went there. I remember I shadowed there and I got to watch other students paint, and to see how Renee Tobin spoke about painting and talked about the process as students were creating art was really important to me as a young kid interested in art.
Can you share a couple of key thoughts, one or two key thoughts that you, because you mentioned it wasn't, I mean, I'm surprised that you mentioned things that she said before you said anything about how she painted or what she did in the studio. And I think that's important.
Right. I think she, well, for starters, my parents never wanted me to pursue a career in art.
Of course,
they of course wanted me, right, of course not. So I think she just opened the doors for my eyes to see how important art is in our world and how many options and career paths there are for young artists. And that was something I never recognized when I was younger. So starting to think about all these options, I felt like, okay, I'll just take some small steps and see where I end up.
That's great. And I think that's something, a really important event in your life that
Mhm.
should be important for all of us. All of us who are here today are here because of the significance of art in our lives and the value that the experience of making art or just looking at and enjoying art has. And it's really important that younger people get that
Mhm.
exposure, get somebody who can let them see that, because just look around at all of us who are here on this Zoom, different ages and different cultures and different backgrounds are all represented here. And that's what art is. It is, I think, a universal language. So
Right.
what happened at Anne Arundel Community College, which I know has a pretty strong program, what
Yeah.
happened there that gave you more impetus to pursue art?
Yeah. So once I was finished with high school, I actually, even though I loved art, I didn't know if I wanted to pursue it as a career. I was so unsure of myself if it was really something that could be financially sustainable to me, right? So once I got to AACC, I actually didn't even take any art classes my first semester. I which was of course a huge mistake on my part. However, I decided to show my portfolio to the art teachers at AACC anyway, just to see what they thought. And I remember the teacher just said, Marissa, you should be taking art classes. So I just felt like, you know what, if they're saying it, I'm just gonna go for it.
Okay,
And
so it was more the emotional support and encouragement and the
yeah,
recognition that you had ability that
yeah,
was important rather than what happened in the studio directly.
yeah. It was also how they told me about how much they enjoyed being teachers in art, which is another career path I never considered myself before. So it was exciting to hear about their excitement being artists while teaching students, while also making a salary.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as you know now, of course, that's often the case. Somebody who's very, very talented can find it difficult to support themselves simply on the income from their
Right,
work.
right.
And so they find something that is hopefully as rewarding as the creative act itself. And teaching
Yes.
often, as a teacher, I know how valuable and how rewarding that can be. So
Yeah.
when you went to uh, your completed your undergraduate, excuse me, your scholastic training, what made you choose MICA, and did you consider other art schools?
I definitely did. So part of it was the how much my parents offered financial support for me. So a little bit of info. So since I was born in Thailand, my mother is Thai, my dad is from the US. It's very important to most Asian cultures that children actually stay close to home, or they kind of, for lack of a better term, obey what the parents allow them to have, right? So my mom was like, Marissa, you are only allowed to stay in Maryland, or else we aren't comfortable financially helping you with other schools outside of the state.
Yeah,
But also, I think, and I just felt like, you know what? I like Micah's program
yeah.
anyway. I have been there, my parents have been there, and they sounded very excited about what the teachers there had to say. And I think I ultimately just went for Micah because once I walked through the senior thesis studios, I was blown away by what students made. The diversity in there was so cool to me, and seeing how students came from so many different backgrounds around the world, it's like I wanted to be a part of that.
Yeah. So
So
you found, luckily, you found the opportunity to follow the direction that your family was pointing you in,
yes,
stay close to family,
yeah,
but you found a place where you were really able to experience, if not the
yes,
whole world, all these different cultures and different
yeah,
approaches to art. Was there any one teacher that directed you towards figurative work? I mean, today most young people your age are looking at, digital
right,
work or some kind of multimedia, and the tradition of figurative art is almost universal. Uh,
yeah,
throughout the world history in the arts. So what made you go back to that more traditional subject and line?
I guess it was because, well, before I committed to going for a painting major at MICA, I was actually more interested in illustration.
Mhm.
And so something Renee Tobin from my high school teacher told me was so important, even for illustrators, was you have to understand human anatomy for you to deconstruct it in an illustrative way. So even since high school, I was like, all right, well, clearly I have to learn more about human anatomy. And the best way to do that was to do it representationally and realistically. But since I've done that, I realized I love the human body. There's so many beautiful things about it and how we're so different, yet clearly we're still all human. We have such unique things about us.
So you said a couple of things that really have caught my attention, and one of them is the way you were just speaking about the human body as a subject, and you seem to be talking more about the interiority of the human experience and how that is manifest physically through the body,
Yes.
gesture, expression, right? Okay.
Yes.
And of course, great artists throughout history have been fascinated with the formal aspects and the difficulty. You know, it's often said that the hardest thing in art to depict is the human body.
Mm.
And I want to say right now, before it slips my mind, I think your representation of hands
Mhm.
is amazing. Most people at your stage of development struggle with hands. And you almost always see a finger or something that seems a knuckle that's not quite right. But I was looking and I didn't find that in your work.
Wow,
So,
thank you, Will.
but the other thing that I think you were saying is the way in which you were directed to the human body by your experiences makes me wonder, have you had much art history? Or in your classes, did they show examples of artists who were figurative artists and sort of let you see how many different things can be done, even if you're going to focus on the human form?
Yeah, we definitely did. And I've had so many art history classes actually, so it's hard to really direct to a specific one. But well, an artist I actually reference back to a lot for multiple reasons is Rembrandt. Because when I render the human figure, I think about light and shadow as forms and to create shape, rather than just looking at the lines that you can find in a human body, for example. I guess I find that in high school a lot, I was thinking so much about making something that looked human rather than thinking about the human as a 3D form. And I found that by studying Rembrandt's use of light and shadow, I could then further think about the human as a 3D object rather than just something on a 2D surface.
Well, you know, I'm getting to know you at the same time that our listeners are. So there's no prepping for this of any substance. I want the audience to know that, so that what I say when I respond to Marisa's work or the things she said is really immediate. And it's the first time that we've had a conversation like this. But you just touched on two things that I think are very important and impressive. First of all, as sort of an aside, but it is related to something you made me think of, you know, when Picasso was 15, he went to a very formal traditional art school in his native Spain, and he won every prize available to students at that art academy when many of the students were in their late 20s, even in their early 30s. So the ability to understand the human form and what's possible on a two-dimensional surface is something that the greatest artists, even some of the greatest modernists, have done first. And then that gave them the tools to go on and do more. So that's one thing you alluded to that as very surprising and impressive to me. The other thing is the way you talked about Rembrandt, because when you said the word Rembrandt as an art historian, I thought, well, Rembrandt really doesn't do that well with figures except for their faces.
Yeah.
But the way that you talked about light and shadow and constructing the figure, and just the fact that you emphasize light and shadow, that's the secret to Rembrandt's portraiture. It's how he uses light and shadow, even in his portraits. So that's a great segue to the first image. So Laura, if you could bring up the first image. All of the images we're going to look at are you, right, Marisa?
Yeah, so I ended up using myself as a model because I used to actually be a very shy person. So I found it so convenient to just take photos of myself. But eventually I kind of segued into using myself as like a character in a painted reality that's meant to emphasize certain emotions rather than just a self-portrait.
Yes. And, that's one of the links. As soon as you said Rembrandt, you probably know that for the first 10 or so years of his career, and actually throughout his career, but especially that early phase, often because he couldn't afford models and it was just more convenient, he created these wonderful self-portraits. There are 30 or 40 of them that exist. Probably more than that if you count all the drawings that are sort of sketch-like. There's many more than 30 or 40. And you talked about, I think you meant to direct us to the fact that you then could sort of take the character that you wanted. And yeah. So this is not the end.
Yeah.
Knowing that this is you and seeing the expression is a very intriguing title and image. So you want to tell us a little bit about what's not ending?
Sure. So this piece was actually for a final in my first semester at MICA, actually. And the idea was to take from a list the teacher had a phrase. And the phrase was actually, I consume endings. But after a year, I wanted to change it to this is not the end, because the point of this expression with the stare and the hands is to like kind of take all of this energy, kind of like an intense power, and to grow from it, to kind of overcome difficult obstacles and just to become a more powerful version of yourself, per se.
So having heard you say that, then the pepositioning of the hands is almost like you're pushing something aside, like you're opening a curtain to peer through it. Again, to be able to have that conception and then to develop an image that so successfully embodies that is, that shows a real mastery of your art at this particular time. But when I looked at this the first time, what I noticed is the way you've applied the paint for a couple of reasons. Have you used the palette knife extensively in this work?
So what's interesting with this, it's not a palette knife, it's actually spatulas that I used.
Oh, okay.
Rubber spatulas, so very close. The reason why I went with those instead of the palette knife is because I could control the edges of how I apply paint better. So the edges I could more control if I wanted them to be soft or harder. I could control how much paint I apply. And I found that so much easier to do with artist spatulas rather than a palette knife, because it's softer, right? Instead of how dense metal palette knives are.
Yeah. And then the other thing, the art historian in me, especially the hand where you see the fingers more extensively and see the nails of that one finger. Are you very familiar with Cézanne's portraits or self-portraits?
Oh, yeah.
Well, because that's what I thought of. As soon as I saw this, I thought of Cézanne because of the little almost facets. And of course, that's where he came up with his ideas of, cones and rods and cylinders in terms of composing figures. And the color is also interesting because it's not I would say it's not entirely naturalistic.
Mm-mm.
Were you consciously doing that so that the colors would affect the reaction of the viewer more strongly?
I was. So the underpainting is actually blue.
Hmm.
So with that in mind, I knew that I wanted the skin tone to be much cooler than it was in reality, which
Yeah.
I thought would give it a more gritty feel.
So would you say then, based on looking at this and some things that you've said already, even though you're a figurative artist and we're going to look at self-portraits, you're not really trying to represent the exterior of your subjects so much as the interior?
Yeah, I think I more or less use the exterior as a vehicle towards what the viewer's interpretation of the interior could be.
Yeah, yeah. So in a way, you're an expressionist.
In a way, yes.
Yeah. Well, let's follow that up and look at the next image, please, Laura. Now, this is fascinating to me because the freedom with which you've worked, and this is acrylic, so, but it's pretty thin acrylic because you've let it run there across the chest and a little bit on the forehead. Is that correct? You're
Yes.
using a pretty thin acrylic paint.
Yes.
And were you trying to get that effect of the runs and drips, or was that accidental and you just
It was
accepted it?
accidental and I just accepted it.
Yeah. And then the shadows, of course, here are very powerfully important. And see, we were caught in a storm or something of that sort.
Yeah.
You want to what's
So,
the sort? What sort of sort?
so I thought about a emotional storm rather than an actual one. So the reason why I went with this title is because during this time period when I made this photo, I wanted to think of creating more, I wanted to create more pieces that felt like they had implied narratives. And something I realized was that, oh, I can also create that implication using titles as well. And
Yes.
so with the blues in this and with the yellow raincoat, this felt very nautical to me in a way. So I saw that the idea of the storm was perfect in this.
So the title is entirely your own. It's not from something you read or something somebody said
Yes.
to you.
But I just felt like if the viewer read it as if it were a quote from something, it'd be more interesting, I think, and let them think about, oh, what could this mean a little more?
So at least right now, if we look at your work, we should pay close attention to the titles. Sometimes titles just, it's almost like you do it because you hope your work's going to be in a catalog of some kind and you want it to have a distinctive title. But to you, the titles are integral to the whole creative process and the final outcome. Is that fair?
For the most part, I do feel as though sometimes sometimes I do feel like titles can be placeholders.
Yeah.
But I think titles are also important to me because of books. Like, I know teachers have always said, don't judge a book by its cover or its title, but I feel like sometimes a title really draws me in, or when I'm reading a book and learn why the title is the title, it's very exciting to me personally.
Yeah.
So I decided to kind of incorporate that into my art as well.
Yeah, I can really identify with that. I try to think of some kind of meaningful title for my work. And if you ever see me show anything that says untitled, it's really because I gave up.
I understand that.
Yeah. All right, let's look at the next image. This is the one that reads to me of the ones you've submitted or selected for us to talk about. It sort of is the most, and I mean this in a positive way, but it's the most straightforward. The title, reflection, I'm not seeing a mirror and I'm seeing the delicate way the necklace is held. And clearly this woman is thinking of something. So how do you see this fitting in? Because the first two works, and I think the one or two more that we're going to look at of the figure works, the portraits, are more suggestive. So this is, you're so firm about,
Right.
and everything is so interwoven tightly. Was that your intention, or did it just, everything worked and fell into place?
Everything worked and fell into place, as you said. So I guess with my process, I don't always know what I want the end result to be in my
Sure.
paintings. But this one, I knew. It just came to mind. I had an idea and everything went perfectly for me.
Now, did that give you a really strong sense of satisfaction that you've already achieved a level with your work that you can have an idea and realize it this successfully?
I don't know if it I don't know if it really felt that way. I think it was more or less well, I guess the process of creating it was very exciting to me. And this was actually a painting that I started during the height of the pandemic, actually. So I think the satisfaction was creating a very well done painting, I'd say, during the intensity of the pandemic.
Yeah. Okay. But of course, it's your work and
Right.
your emotional experience. But to me, every time I take a photograph and it turns out the way that I wanted it,
Mhm.
it's always such
Yeah,
a
yeah.
good feeling, because it doesn't, for a
Right.
photographer, maybe more than a painter, you make all these images and sometimes, you just, weeks and weeks of stuff. You think, well,
Right, right.
none of that's really very good. This, because of the palette, the gold and the black,
Mhm.
the extensive use of black, and the details of the necklace too, made me think of Velázquez and some of the Spanish
Mm,
17th century painters. Are you very
yeah.
familiar with their work?
A little. I can think of some images though.
Yeah. Well, I would, if you're really happy with the palette and the way that you've used black, and you have black of different intensities, and then you
Mhm.
play it off against that gold drape there, uh, they have the Velázquez and his followers, and the Dutch artists like Rembrandt and
Yeah.
Hals, they play with this same sort of palette, and I think you've done
Mhm.
a really striking, very strong job here with that. So maybe that would be of interest to you to look at more.
Definitely.
Let's look at the next image. Okay, I
Mhm.
honestly thought this when I first saw
Mhm.
it because of the blue palette and the pensive expression. Picasso's blue period, maybe?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'd say, yeah, this can relate to that. Absolutely. So this one I made, I think it was after I finished my senior thesis at MICA. And of course, after that was done, I felt like, man, I didn't know what I wanted to do now that I was done with college. And the
Uh-huh.
pandemic was still going on. And I think I was so caught up in all of these ideas that I could do that I wasn't really trying anything, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
So, and I wanted to create a painting that kind of expressed that a little bit. So now that you mentioned Picasso's blue period, I would say this one is definitely more representative of me personally.
Uh-huh. Well, well, that
Yeah.
makes sense to me as, an art historian looking at a young artist's work and thinking about what influences or connections there might be. And a couple of specific points. Do you mean yourself to seem to be at sea, as people say? I noticed that some of the waves in the foreground
Mhm.
almost seem to be covering part of your arms and your torso. Is that
Yeah.
is that intentional to make that kind of reference?
Yes, it was also something that I wanted to experiment with. I want to experiment with a figure kind of becoming part of their background rather than just a
Yeah,
figure and the background per se.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think it works very
Yeah,
effectively, and the
thank you.
title is what makes it work so well, I think. And then just one last observation, sort of a critique. When I look at the both hands, particularly the hands where you can see the fingernails, and when I
Mhm.
look at what is our left, the right side of the face of the figure, to get that roundness, that curvature, and that highlight and shadow on the side of the face. I've seen a lot of people that have been painting for a lot longer than you that can't come anywhere close to that.
Oh my
You really
gosh.
are showing, to me and to us, I think, a very high level of skill and potential for your growth as an artist. So this is impressive.
Thank you, Will.
This is even more expressive in terms of its technique and its kind of not extreme, not unnatural. I'm not sure I'm finding the right word, but it's more stylized palette, not so naturalistic. Do you think this is the way you're going? I mean, you selected and sequenced these. Are you trying to tell us that you're going into a more expressive and less representational approach to your figurative work?
I'm experimenting with mixing both. So I feel like as an artist who really enjoys representational work, I think something I always tell my peers is that it's important to learn how to paint representationally, because that's, by learning to do that, you can more easily break down the reality of our world into what you want viewers to see, right?
Yep.
So this is where I've really started to kind of break down what I see, and especially with texture, how I play with texture and break it down to something that is more representative of emotions. Right.
And I'm so glad you said that, just because one of my pet peeves as an art historian is teaching the introduction to art history and having students who are really studio majors, but they're being made to take it. And, you know, now this was some time ago. I hope things have changed for the better, but I'm not sure they have. But the students would revolt. Why should I study all of this old stuff?
Oh my gosh,
you know, why do I have to look at these paintings of gods and goddesses and, you know, saints and sinners and all of that? Well, because that's part of the way you learn what you want to do and who you want to be as an artist. So you've obviously learned that.
Yes, I have.
Okay, so we have one more image and then we'll have time for a Q&A. Let's look at this, because I think everybody watching is going to be very surprised.
Yeah.
So why the landscape after all of these wonderful figure paintings? What's going on here?
So I feel like when after my thesis, I just, felt like I wasn't doing enough. I kind of had this existential crisis, and something in me just wanted to do even more than I was already doing. I think it's just part of being a young artist. Like feeling I should be experimenting with things. So I actually before I painted this, I took part in Paint Annapolis for the very first time ever last year. And that was actually the first time I've done plein air, seriously. And I realized, oh my gosh, I love this. So once that summer was over, I took a landscape course at AACC. And the teacher took us out to different parts of Anne Arundel County. And we got to paint as a group. And it was so nice to do after all that has happened during the pandemic. And I feel like I've also wanted to incorporate landscape into my figurative work. So I think by me going out there and doing some plein air work, I learned a lot, and I feel really comfortable incorporating landscape into my future figurative work.
Yeah, well, I really see that as a good opportunity for you. That's just my reaction to the little of your work that I've been able to see, because to me, this is an expressive landscape. It's not a literal, naturalistic, detailed image. And it does seem to have the same spirit, the same kind of emotional connection for me as your portraits that we've been looking at and talking about. So anyway, I think this is looks like an exciting new avenue for you to explore. And since you seem to have a clear conception of why you're doing it, I would look forward to a lot of exciting results.
Thank you.
Well, it's been really great getting to know you and your work. And now I see that we've done pretty well with our time. And so there's 15 or so minutes for questions. Audience, who wants to go first? Come on, Chris, you always have good questions.
I do see someone asked, when during a painting do you develop the title? And this can happen from any stage of the painting, before I even start the painting, during the painting process, or months after even.
Would you retitle the work?
Sometimes I do, actually. Sometimes I think of something and I just like, oh, that's more fitting. Let me just change that.
Yeah. Well, keep at it. That drives art historians nuts.
Yes.
If anybody ever writes about you, they'll. Okay. Anybody else? Jim?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. Well, I see Marisa practically every week over at the community college when I go over to make prints, and I'm not sure what she's there supposed to be doing. She's always there every time I go there. But I had no idea of the fact that she is a master painter, and I had no idea that she was doing these wonderful paintings. And I hope to see more of them.
Thank you, Jim. That means a lot.
There's another point. At the reception for my show at Paul's Homewood Cafe, Marisa's father, whose name is Marisa Evangelista, not a surprise, but he came up to me and reminded me that we had an overlap in the 1950s when I was doing my degree in physics. I did it on a huge tract of land near Harvard College Observatory, and on the observatory there suddenly emerged a huge radio telescope, and Mark, it turns out, was working in a very important way on this radio telescope.
Wow. Small world.
The point of that story, by the way, the radio telescope was called the Haystack Telescope. But the basic point about this contact, well, there are two basic points. One of them is that there aren't enough relationships to go around. And the second one is that I am not surprised, after talking to Mark, to hear that Marisa is making something out of her life.
Well, good. That's that. Thanks for sharing that with us, Jim. And it's nice to see that you appreciate her work, and I hope you'll spread the word, as I hope you all will. So I think there were a couple more questions in the chat. Jim, and did you want to say anything else?
No, I'm done.
Okay. Okay.
In more ways than one.
All right. Thank you. Somebody has asked Marisa that you say something about the painting directly behind you, and I'm glad they did that because I forgot to do it.
Oh yeah, me too. So I was fortunate to have a piece in the MFA's Art on Paper show. And this painting I did using casein, which is similar to gouache. It's like gouache, but if it were more milky. It is made out of milk. So that's why. Yeah, and it is called Unamused, as the expression may tell you.
Is that meant to be sort of playful?
It
Or-
is.
Yeah, yeah. It really, even though the expression is intense, it does have a different mood
Yeah.
than your other work. So is that part of what you like to do with your figurative work, to explore all these different emotions?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think humans are so interesting. So how can I convey all the different aspects of our emotions?
Yeah, an endless source of subject matter, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, there's one other question in the chat. Do you see plein air work as a study for a studio piece?
I see them as studies, but I guess I also see them as final works, for lack of a better term. I definitely see them as a way to study, just as I do with painting the human body from life, right? Everything I do is a study for whatever is the next piece I create. But also, I take studies just as seriously as I take concepts that I have. Does that make sense?
Yes. Oh, yes. And something that you and the audience might find interesting is I haven't been through the West Building of the National Gallery where I worked for so long since COVID, but I'm hoping that it is still there. There was a small room of 18th and 19th century, it's in the French galleries, devoted to small paintings of the landscape. And it was there partly because some of you may know that in the French Academy and the academies that were modeled on the French example, they would send students out to paint before nature, paint in plein air, but they would call them pochades, and they would be small, and they would be brought back to the studio to then be the source material for finished academic painting. And it was in the 18th century that people started to say, well, those are beautiful paintings. They're so colorful, they're so spontaneous, they're so atmospheric. Maybe we should take them as finished works.
Yeah,
And that's really where that's where the impressionist, the whole idea of impressionism, in a sense, has that academic root. So you're doing what artists have done, and I encourage you to keep moving along that path.
Definitely will.
They can stand in either room, if you will.
Yeah, it's so cool that you mentioned that. Actually, I just bought my first pochade box, so I can do more plein air painting outside.
Yeah, great. Any other questions? There you go, Chris. I knew you
called on me. I figured I better come up with one.
Yeah.
I recognize as you say, the parallels with Rembrandt, or the echoes of Rembrandt. I'm presuming that the pictures that we saw were more or less in chronological order, which also makes me recognize that, as Will obviously knows as well, Rembrandt started out as a Dutch realist, and then over the course of his career, the actual laying on the paint became more and more diffuse. Back as Jerry Salt said, well, it's kind of brown, towards the end. But nevertheless, the emotional truth of his pictures remain the same, if not intensified, in spite of the fact that they weren't Vermeer at the end of his career. And I see that also in the works that you presented to us. With that as a long preamble, first of all, am I correct in thinking that that's part of your trajectory that you're recognizing? And if so, how do you see that translating into the landscape work that you're doing? What's the emotional truth, or what's the emotional truth in the landscapes?
I guess going specifically from that, so I actually kind of had a hate-love relationship with landscapes before I did paint Annapolis. I was actually avoiding landscapes for a while because I had difficulty finding the emotional truth in landscapes. I couldn't manipulate landscapes like I can do with my photographs, right? But part of it is just going out there and seeing what I can capture in that specific moment as landscapes. And that's kind of the beauty of plein air. Just kind of, instead of photographing something, to just capture the beauty of that space as time moves. So I think there's a lot I still have to learn with landscapes, but doing that, I think, and just kind of discovering the area's own emotional truth without me forcing something to be there was just very fascinating to me. And that's why I still want to continue with plein air.
You're speaking to a landscape photographer, so
Oh,
yes.
okay.
Well, the self-awareness as an artist that you showed in those comments, that reaction to Chris's question, I think will stand you in good stead. I don't see any other questions. I may be missing something, but before we take any other questions or close, I just want to say, for the benefit particularly of you, Marisa, you know, Rembrandt, as he became more abstract, to use our terminology, he wouldn't have said that. His career has this very pronounced arc of popularity and then disfavor and then popularity again. And it's almost all related to that increased fluidity of his approach to drawing and printmaking and painting, because he was replaced near the end of his life by more popular artists that were described by the term fine malerai, or fine paintings, you know, not like Vermeer. They were even more sort of photographic and crystalline in their appearance. And then his second wave of popularity was in the late 18th century, when the French began to accept those pochades, or plein air studies, as finished works of art. And then people said, oh, well, that's like Rembrandt. Isn't Rembrandt wonderful? You know, so it's kind of an interesting thing, and will probably happen to any artist that lives long enough, or their fame lives long enough. So if we've very nicely fit into our hour time slot. Are there any remaining questions? Oh, I see one from Laura. And yes, I will remind everybody at this point that it takes a week or two for the editing of every Wil Talk, after which it will be posted. The link will be posted to the YouTube version, and it will be posted both on the website for the MFA and usually through a member's email that'll go out to let you know about things that are happening, like the posting of a Wil Talk. And we'll have our next talk in 2 weeks. Gordon is a very interesting artist who is more or less abstract, at least the little limited I know about his work. So that'll be a nice change of pace and introduce an artist that I think will be new to most of you. So again, thanks for sharing your hour with all of us. And thanks, Laura, for your support as the administrator. And most of all, Marisa, it's been really great seeing your work and getting to know you better. And I think you have a very great potential for the future of your work. So congratulations for what you've done, and good luck in the future.
Thank you so
See you
much.
all in 2
This is
weeks.
great.
All right. Good night.
Thank you.